$2.5 billion in damages occur annually from feral pigs in the United States. Yet in Australia, yellow crazy ants have wreaked even greater havoc. In mere years, they built a supercolony of 12 billion individuals, 50 times the country's human population. One can notice the swarm moving across the terrain as a single relentless mass. But this is just the beginning. 40 million red crabs perished, wiped out by the invasive force. At first glance, the ants seem insignificant, but in reality, they triggered the collapse of an ecosystem over 100 million years old. Chemicals and machines failed to reverse the crisis. The solution required a different approach. Why was the parasitic wasp chosen to turn the tide? It seems counterintuitive to fight an infestation with another insect. But this creature, so tiny one could miss it in the blink of an eye, saved the environment. The biological interaction proved more effective than industrial force. Thus, the ecosystem began its slow recovery from the brink. 110,000 red crabs for every single human resident define the overwhelming biological density of this remote Australian territory. 200 million arthropods dominate the landscape of Christmas Island in the Indian Ocean. This creates a stark contrast against a tiny population of just 1,800 people. Have you ever wondered why this tropical place bears the name of a December holiday? The designation implies a festive origin unrelated to the climate. However, the answer dates back to 1643, when a British captain spotted the island on Christmas Day. Human mining operations did not begin until 200 years later. Settlers arrived to extract phosphate, a mineral formed from bird droppings that enriched the local soil. Yet the red crabs had already claimed the territory. For 37 million years of isolation, they evolved into ecosystem engineers. At first glance, they appear to be simple scavengers, but in reality, they maintain the rainforest's health by digging through soil and clearing leaf litter. One can notice how the ground stays clear due to their constant movement. Every year, the world watches a massive biological phenomenon. Hundreds of millions of crabs emerge from the forest canopy. But this is just the beginning. The creatures cross roads and climb specially built bridges. The migration descends to the sea to spawn, a spectacle iconic enough to feature in a Google Doodle. Consequently, over 70% of the land is now a protected national park. The sanctuary protects endemic species like the giant coconut crab, Abbott's booby, and hidden underground rivers. The red crabs serve as the foundation of this structure. When they thrive, the forest functions biologically. If they vanish, the ecosystem begins to collapse. The 20th century marked a silent turning point for the island, as cargo ships brought more than just supplies. Humans unknowingly delivered a passenger far more dangerous than any predator the red crabs had ever faced: the yellow crazy ant. Why did this tiny invader pose such a catastrophic threat to a stable ecosystem? The arrival of the ants went almost unnoticed among the imported goods, but without natural land-based predators to check them, they unleashed a biological siege on this defenseless paradise. One can observe that their name, crazy, derives not from madness, but from their frantic, erratic movements and incredibly fast attack speed. At first glance, they seem like chaotic insects, but in reality, they function as a highly coordinated biological weapon. But this is just the beginning. 12 billion individuals, this staggering figure represents the peak population reached on Christmas Island, exceeding the human population of Australia by 50 times. Millions of ants operate as a single, unified organism. During the rainy season, the ants surge to the surface like a living acid flow, marching straight into red crab territory. They attack armed with formic acid, one of the strongest naturally occurring acids, targeting the crab's eyes with lethal precision. It is visible how the spray blinds the crustaceans within seconds, rendering them defenseless. Thousands of ants overwhelm the giants, killing them in less than a day in what scientists describe as a natural chemical war. It gets more complex further on. Consequently, the red crab population plummeted from 40 million to as low as 15 million in just a few years. This represents an unprecedented and catastrophic decline for the species. Because the crabs were no longer present to clear the forest floor, the ecosystem began to suffocate under thick layers of decaying leaf litter. One can notice how the ground became drier and more fire-prone, deprived of essential oxygen circulation. Young trees sprouted uncontrollably, choking the understory. But the devastation did not stop at the forest floor, extending to the island's rare avian residents. Endemic birds like Abbott's booby lost their nesting grounds as trees began dying in large numbers. An ecosystem that had operated in harmony for 110 million years began to crack in the span of just a few rainy seasons. The island now faces a slow path to restoration. 95% is the staggering figure by which yellow crazy ant densities rise in areas occupied by the yellow lac-scale insect. This explosion of life on Christmas Island relies entirely on a strange natural alliance between two distinct species. The tiny scale insect clings immobile to tree trunks, extracting sap, while the ants patrol ceaselessly around them. But this is just the beginning of the ecological shift. Why did this specific invasive species multiply at a rate beyond anything scientists had previously observed in standard ecological models? The answer remains hidden until the biological interaction is analyzed. The yellow lac scale excretes a nutrient-rich, sweet substance known as honeydew. To the yellow crazy ant, this fluid acts as high-energy fuel, providing a constant food source that enables them to reproduce rapidly and stay active non-stop. One can notice how the ants tend to these immobile insects like farmers tending livestock, carefully harvesting the liquid. In exchange for this unlimited supply of sugar, the ants aggressively chase off or kill every natural predator that threatens the scales. It seems like a simple symbiotic exchange, but in reality, they have unintentionally developed a form of insect agriculture that functions as a potent ecological weapon. The process is only gaining momentum. As the number of protected scales grows, the volume of produced honeydew increases proportionally across the forest. Because of this surplus energy, the ant population surges, creating a dangerous feedback loop scientists compare to pouring gasoline on a fire. The camera glides along the forest floor, where every square meter turns into part of a vast, interconnected supercolony. It does not end at this stage. Native land predators on Christmas Island offer virtually no biological resistance to this relentless expansion. There are no birds or reptiles in high enough numbers to keep the invaders in check or slow their reproduction. It is visible how the ants spread centimeter by centimeter each day, engulfing the entire ecosystem without pause. Thus, the empire of ants secures its absolute dominance over the island. 6 pounds per acre is the density of toxic bait required to saturate the forest floor against the invasion. Faced with the explosive spread of yellow crazy ants, humans were forced to intervene with radical measures to save the ecosystem. For many years, the only solution Australia could turn to was protein bait laced with fipronil. This is a highly potent chemical capable of wiping out entire ant colonies from just a few individuals consuming it. At first glance, the strategy seems simple: poison the pest. But in reality, the execution proved far more difficult. Why was the timing of the aerial deployment absolutely critical? To an observer, the dry season looks ordinary, but the bait could only be deployed during this specific window when red crabs were still hidden in their burrows. If the operation overlapped with the crab migration season by even a few weeks, millions of crabs could accidentally consume the toxic pellets and die en masse. Even with perfect timing, deploying the bait was a logistical nightmare due to the geography. Yellow crazy ant strongholds were located in rugged terrain, hidden amongst cliffs, dense rainforests, and deep valleys. Helicopters had to be used to drop the bait from above, navigating dangerous wind currents to ensure coverage. One can notice how the bait scatters like rain through the canopy, aiming for the leaf litter below. But this is just the beginning of the challenge. At one point, it seemed like victory was finally within reach for the conservationists. Within just 4 weeks, ant numbers had dropped by 99% across the treated zones. From untreated corners of the forest, however, the yellow crazy ants re-emerged with renewed intensity. They appeared stronger, more numerous, and seemingly immune to previous efforts. Using fipronil was like mowing weeds without pulling out the roots. The surface looked clean for a few months, but underground, the supercolony continued to silently regenerate. It is visible how the ants reclaimed the territory, swarming over the very ground that was poisoned. Worse still, fipronil did not discriminate between friend and foe. The toxin killed native insects as well, disrupting local food chains and leaving conservationists with a troubling question. Are we saving the ecosystem by destroying it? On top of that, each large-scale campaign could cost between $1.3 million and $2 million. This sum does not even include manpower, equipment maintenance, and the risks involved in low-altitude flying. All of these factors pointed to a sobering truth regarding the future. Chemicals could not be the long-term answer. One single biological agent, small enough to fit on the head of a pin, became Australia's last hope when all other options reached a dead end. The country was forced to pursue an entirely new solution that few could have imagined. Why did the scientists choose to attack the yellow lac scale instead of the ants directly? At a superficial level, the ants appear to be the primary enemy. However, the scales function as the fuel factory powering the entire yellow crazy ant empire, making them the critical vulnerability. The solution arrived in the form of the parasitic wasp Tacharti somervilli, a creature that acts as a precise biological weapon. But this is just the beginning of the complex operation. One can notice how each wasp, despite its size, seeks out yellow lac scales to pierce their bodies and lay eggs inside. The larvae slowly consume the scale insect from within until only a hollow shell remains. Once these scales disappear, the vital supply of honeydew runs dry and the ants lose the fuel they need to continue expanding. But this strategy carried enormous risks, as Australia had already paid dearly for the introduction of cane toads in 1935. That biological mistake plagued the continent for nearly a century, and no one wanted to repeat such a disaster. At first glance, introducing a predator seems simple, but in reality, it requires absolute certainty to avoid ecological collapse. Before the parasitic wasps were approved for release, scientists conducted over 3 years of testing on 131 native species to ensure the new agents would leave everything else untouched. Transition to the next level. Once all risks had been assessed and minimized, the campaign officially began its aerial phase. Helicopters flew over the hot zones of the supercolonies, opening their doors to release 18,000 parasitic wasps into the atmosphere. The camera glides along the canopy as the silent army drifts downward, carrying the hope of turning the tide without a single drop of poison. There is no mechanical noise and no forests blanketed in toxic bait during this process. The tiny creatures simply begin their mission to sever the energy supply line of the empire. 700 ants per square meter was the density recorded in the infestation hotspots before the intervention. In the first few months after the release of the parasitic wasps, no one dared to hope for a miracle. The wasps were microscopic, while the scale insects covered every surface, and the yellow crazy ants dominated the forest canopy. At first glance, the introduction of such a tiny predator seemed insignificant against a supercolony, but in reality, it sparked a chain reaction. The first signs of change appeared quietly on the branches. One can notice how the yellow lac scales gradually vanished from the wood, once coated in sticky honeydew. But this is just the beginning, because without the constant supply of honeydew to fuel them, the energy source of the yellow crazy ant supercolonies began to dry up. Why did the scientists wait 2 full years before returning to the largest hotspot? The ecosystem required time for the biological agents to spread through the dense foliage. Their return was necessary to measure the true impact of the airborne army. When the helicopter doors had opened years prior, the outcome was uncertain, but the team was now met with a stunned silence. It is visible how the landscape had changed from a bustling insect empire to a graveyard. Where thousands once marched, barely more than 10 ants remained alive in the sample zone. The colony that had ruled the forest lay in ruins. Not long after this discovery, the island's true residents began to reclaim their territory. Red crabs, once decimated by the tens of millions, appeared again along the forest trails. They dug fresh burrows and cleared the leaf litter, reactivating the ecosystem like a machine being oiled after years of paralysis. The process is only gaining momentum. The number of red crabs participating in the annual migration surged from 40 or 50 million to over 100 million in the year 2024. But the revival extended beyond just the crabs. Thick layers of dead, flammable leaves began to disappear from the ground. Forest patches, once blanketed in black mold, started to turn green again as the natural balance restored itself. Endemic bird species like the Abbott's booby stopped their population decline. An entire ecosystem, once on the verge of total collapse, was slowly coming back to life. However, it does not end at this stage. Danger still lurks in the deep forest zones where humans have never set foot. The yellow crazy ants have not disappeared entirely. They have simply retreated into untreated areas. Here, yellow lac scales still survive, providing enough honeydew to sustain the remnants of the supercolonies. Billions of ants rise again from the soil during the rainy season. A single misstep in management could trigger a massive resurgence, allowing the invaders to spread back into controlled zones and rebuild their empire faster than anyone might expect. The story on Christmas Island is not just about biological control. It serves as a reminder that ecosystems sustained over millions of years can be shattered by human error. Yet nature holds the power to heal if we listen and act with care. The battle for the future of this 100-million-year-old ecosystem continues, with every decision shaping its survival.